In tonight's story, betrayal runs deep, but revenge runs deeper. You're listening to Revenge with Jack, where justice always finds its way. "We can get 3 junior engineers for your salary," Adrian Mercer said, the corner of his mouth flicking like a glitch he chose not to fix. Nothing personal, just cost-cutting. I watched the words drift across the polished table and disappear into the glass wall, where Midtown wore its mourning like armor. "My name is Rowan Hart, 55, lead systems engineer, 18 years in this building. I built the lattice that let this company breathe. Now the new CTO, 6 months in, Cornell MBA, designer frames, was telling me air was cheaper elsewhere." Paula Chun from HR slid a folder toward me as if it might bruise. "Severance is 2 months' salary, plus accrued vacation." Her voice was careful, like walking over ice. Adrian waited, pinned between fingers, ready to sign off on my silence. I nodded. "Thank you," I said. "Is that all you have to say?" He blinked, as if I had skipped to the end of a presentation. Maybe he expected a scene. Threats. Lawyers. A performance he could summarize in a memo about legacy attitudes resisting innovation. "What would you like me to say?" I asked. "Most people have questions," he offered. I shrugged. Seemed straightforward. It wasn't calm. It was something past calm. I was done. There's a difference your body knows before your mind catches on. He shifted to transition. The new hires would need guidance, perhaps a short consulting engagement. A few weeks. Flexible. I told him I'd think about it, already knowing I wouldn't. We shook hands, the ceremony of endings. My office took 13 minutes to empty. 18 years in a single cardboard box, a chipped mug, a stack of conference badges, a photo of Clara and me on a gray beach where the wind sketched ribs in the sand. I nodded to people who couldn't hold my eyes. Survival makes you polite. In the garage, my phone buzzed. A text from Nate Alvarez, the database admin I'd hired 12 years ago. "Vic, Rowan, you okay?" The team's freaking out. I let the screen go dark. The elevator doors closed like a book I had already read. Home was Lake Ontario in late light. Copper poured across the water until it looked like patience. I sat on the deck with a small bourbon and the kind of quiet that expands your chest. Clara set a hand on my shoulder. "What will you do now?" she asked. I watched the horizon keep its line. "Something will turn up." It sounded like faith, though I meant it as a boundary. What Adrian hadn't learned was this. I didn't just install systems. I wrote their bones. The redundancies you can't see. The security layers named like lullabies. The interlocks that hold when the obvious breaks. Documentation? Denied for years. What I kept was not a secret. It was craft. And I wasn't planning to translate that into bullet points for a cheaper audience. The lake darkened. Somewhere a gull cried like a hinge. I finished my drink, stood, and carried the box inside. I didn't start with racks and dashboards. I started with a folding table and a dial-up tone that sounded like someone trying to speak through gravel. Harborview Properties was 4 buildings then, 12 employees, a fax that jammed on every third page. Harold Bain, the founder, shook my hand with fingers still inked from signing rent checks. "We're expanding," he said, and the word was less promise than homework. He wanted something solid, something that wouldn't blink when the wind picked up off the lake. So I built it the way my father taught me to fix a leaking faucet. Shut off the water, understand the pressure, label each part in a coffee can before you touch the next. A mail server that didn't panic. Shared storage that forgave mistakes. A little script to track maintenance calls so the super didn't keep it all in his head. Then tenant applications, background checks, unit turns, rent collection, late fee logic. Piece by piece, like laying stones you know you'll have to step on barefoot in January. We grew from 4 properties to a county, then a region. I wrote nights, rewrote weekends, documented what I could in comments when the budget wouldn't cover a proper knowledge base. I named cron jobs after constellations because it felt right that timing should follow stars. When Harold retired, his son Jason joined the board and sold to private equity. New signage, Veltria homes. New fonts, new slogans about frictionless living. The culture shifted by half degrees you don't notice until the shoreline has moved. We used to talk about solving problems before they reached tenants. Now we talked about quarterly optics. The phrase right-sizing appeared in meetings like a draft under a door. I asked for a documentation team, 2 technical writers, 1 librarian mind to keep the schema honest. Too expensive, they said. Next quarter. Then the next. In tech, The cheapest day to document is yesterday. After that, the price compounds like interest you don't see until your statement arrives. Still, we kept humming. 63 properties, 4 states, thousands of families who didn't know my name and didn't need to. Lights turned on. Work orders routed. ACH hit on time. That's the social contract of infrastructure. If we do our job well, it looks like nothing at all. Consultants began to orbit. Sharp, fast voices, slide decks about disruption, and lift and shift to cloud. They smiled through my diagrams, then recommended off-the-shelf platforms that would snap cleanly in a demo and shear under real traffic. I pushed back without raising my voice, drew lines on whiteboards, showed them the seams where our systems fused: identity, payments, scheduling, compliance. They nodded, took photos, and wrote reports that sounded like victory. Clara noticed first. "They're pushing you to the edges," she said, over a bowl of soup that steamed like a reminder to breathe. "Prepare." I told her they needed me, that no one else understood how the bones met the skin. She tilted her head. "Maybe that's why." I laughed then, soft and tired. Winter was coming in off the lake, and I told myself the creak in the house was only the cold. Adrian arrived like a new operating system, sleek, certain, full of notifications. He brought 3 juniors in his first month, each with a brightness I recognized from old mirrors. They were good kids, smart in the way school makes you smart. They shadowed me, notebooks open, code editors glowing like aquariums. "What does this service do?" one asked, pointing at a module called Keel. I told him it holds the balance when everything else pitches. He nodded, typed, and I could see it didn't land. Another asked why we stored some logs twice. "Because when the river overflows, you want 2 bridges." He smiled, but I knew he pictured a diagram, not water. I gave them access to the read-only mirrors, walked them through the redundancies, the heartbeat checks, the tripwires that locked down when inputs went strange. We paired on a ticket. Maintenance requests were lagging under certain zip codes. I showed them how a misbehaving third-party API could turn a queue into a traffic jam. We wrote a shim to smooth the spikes, added a feature flag in case the vendor got their act together. They saw the fix, not the weather system behind it. It wasn't their fault. Architecture is geology. You learn the layers by living with them. Meetings shifted. First, my invites moved from required to optional. Then someone forgot to add me. The deck titles changed their verbs: replace, standardize, sunset. There was a town hall where Adrian spoke about legacy complexity like an inherited attic full of furniture you don't need. He never said my name. He didn't have to. The room turned as one toward what was easy to measure. I kept a list on a yellow pad. Things we should document before we touch anything. Authentication flows. Payment retries. The maintenance scheduler's bias toward emergencies after storms. The old code that handled fair housing compliance checks at the edge. I'd bring it up, it would slide to the bottom of the agenda. Paula from HR stopped by one afternoon with a cheerful flyer about new wellness initiatives. "How are you doing, Rowan?" she asked. "Hydrated," I said. We both smiled at the wrong thing. Clara watched me read after midnight with the light low. "Have a plan," she said. I told her I'd start cleaning my desk, just in case. She kissed my temple. "Good," she said. "Clean without bitterness." The quarterly check-in landed on my calendar with no subject line, just a room number. I knew. You can hear a building tell you when the load-bearing wall is next. I wore the navy jacket that doesn't wrinkle and took the long way through the hallway where the original server closet still hums like a beehive in winter. I put my palm on the door. Warmth. Memory. Then I walked to the meeting on time, because leaving well is also a kind of engineering. 2 weeks after the meeting with the soft carpet and the hard smile, my phone started performing triage without me. First came a voicemail from Adrian, crisp at the edges. "Rowan, we're seeing issues with the tenant portal, timeouts, some 500s. The juniors are on it, but they're encountering some of your architectural choices. Quick consult." He meant. We pulled a thread and found a net. I let it go to transcription, watched the words arrange themselves into the small panic of someone who didn't yet believe in consequences. By noon, there were 3 more messages. The tone shifted from confident to clipped. Payment retries aren't resolving. Maintenance requests are stuck in pending. Can we hop on for 15? I made a sandwich, cut it in half, and ate slowly, as if slowness itself could be a boundary. The lake outside wore a pewter sky. A gull took the wind like a handhold. Paula called in the afternoon, voice wrapped in empathy. Rowan, I hope you're doing well. We'd like to discuss a temporary consulting arrangement, generous compensation, just to help the team understand your code paths. I asked how generous. She named a number, 300 an hour, 4-hour minimum. It would have felt like respect if respect had arrived before the fire. I'll think about it, I said, meaning I'd think about not thinking about it again. That evening, Nate texted, no punctuation, like someone running. System down all day maintenance Q dead Graham. Adrian, spiraling. I stared at the screen until the glow felt like a fever. I didn't answer. Not because I wanted them to drown. Because I knew the difference between a rescue and a habit. Sometimes you throw a rope and sometimes you let the lesson rise, heavy and undeniable, from the riverbed. The next morning I brewed coffee until the kitchen measured like a metronome. Clara leaned on the counter, watching me the way you watch weather. What are you thinking, she asked. That they're calculating cost, I said, and today they're learning value. She nodded, as if to say, keep the sentence short, it will hold more. By day 3, my inbox was a museum of urgency. Subject lines sprinting, escalation, critical, board oversight. The juniors had found the scheduler, but not the pattern behind it. Why the cron named Perseus yields to Orion during storms. How a failure in a county feed triggers a fallback that preserves fairness in the queue. They had the code. They didn't have the story. That's the quiet cruelty of good systems. When they work, they erase their own biography. On day 4, I turned off notifications, set the phone face down, and walked the waterfront path with Clara. Wind stitched the water into scales. We counted dogs. A tugboat hummed like an old server with perfect uptime. Will you take their offer? She asked. I shook my head. If I go back now, I teach them the wrong math. We walked until the cold reached our teeth and came home to a house that remembered how to hold heat. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt accurate. Silence, chosen, can be a form of design. The email arrived with the candor of good timing. No subject line fireworks, just a simple, steady hand. From Lawrence Delvin, Director of Technology, Delvin Systems. He'd heard about my departure. He admired the platform I'd built at Veltria Homes from afar, a phrase that felt like binoculars and patience. We're preparing a full upgrade of our property management stack, he wrote. Would you be open to a conversation? I read it twice, once as caution and once as invitation. Clara was setting plates on the table, the sound of porcelain like small bells. Good news? She asked. A door, I said. Just a crack. We set a meeting for the next afternoon at a coffee shop downtown, neutral ground away from badges and reception desks. I closed the laptop, stood at the sink, and washed my hands longer than necessary, as if something might rinse off that the water understood better than I did. After dinner we walked the block, counting porch lights and the last brave roses. The air had the metallic smell of snow thinking about us. The doorbell rang just as I was slicing an apple. The house took a breath, and there was Adrian on the porch, designer frames slightly askew, suit wrinkled in a way stress can iron into cloth. Behind him, the evening had turned the streetlights to small moons. Rowan, he said, voice pitched between urgency and entitlement. I apologize for dropping by. We have an emergency. He described it fast, as if speed itself could be a fix. Nothing working, consultants looping, the juniors exhausted, the board impatient, tenants angrier than numbers can hold. We need your help, he said finally. The board authorized 500 an hour. Whatever it takes. He waited for the words to land like a parachute. I looked past him at the neighbor's maple, bare now, limbs black against a graphite sky. I'm sorry, I said. I have a meeting tomorrow. He blinked, as if the word tomorrow were an insult. We'll pay more, he added, and I felt something in me go quiet, the way a lake stills when wind runs out of story. It's not about price, I said. He tried a different door. If you don't help, people get hurt, the tenants, the staff. I nodded. That's why we build with care when we have the chance, I said, not unkindly. I asked for the time to teach this system its own language. He swallowed, looked smaller. For a second I could see the boy he'd been, smart, swift, certain that effort plus charm equals outcome. I wish you luck, I said. Truly. I closed the door without slamming it. Clara handed me the knife I'd set down, the apple still waiting. How do you feel? She asked. I searched for grand words, justice, payback, clarity, and found none. Clean, I said. We finished the apple over the sink, seeds clicking in the bowl. That night, I slept without waking. No clock checks, no phantom pings. Morning came like a decision that didn't need my vote. I ironed a shirt that fit the day, printed a single-page CV for politeness, and drove to the coffee shop with the lake on my left, gray as patience. Peace doesn't announce itself. It just sits in the passenger seat and stops looking at the map. Lawrence chose a corner table where you could see the door and the snow starting to sketch the street. He stirred his coffee the way careful people do, slow, listening. "I've followed your work," he said, and it didn't feel like flattery. It felt like someone who'd read footnotes. He didn't ask for heroics. He asked for habits. We don't want sleek if sleek means fragile. We want something we can explain to a new hire without praying. Then the offer. Chief Systems Architect, full benefits, stock options, salary 20% above Veltria. I asked him why me, given the market is full of bright, hungry people. He smiled. Because I want the engineer who names cron jobs after constellations and can tell me why. I thought of Clara's quiet question, have a plan, and felt the answer settle. Yes, I said. On one condition. He raised an eyebrow. Documentation isn't a phase, I told him. It's the work. He nodded before I finished. Agreed, he said. I liked him more for not needing the sermon. I started the following Monday. A desk, a badge, a hallway with photos of teams instead of executives. I wrote a one-page charter and taped it above the whiteboard. No single points of failure. No secrets in heads. Narrative before code. Tests that fail loudly. Runbooks that a stranger can follow at 3 a.m. SLOs with teeth. Drills that make us better, not brave. We scheduled weekly architecture reviews, rotated on-call, paired juniors with seniors in a way that made both feel necessary. I drew our roadmap like a river delta, streams merging, widening, pressure accounted for. Meanwhile, Veltria's messages came like weather bulletins. Nate forwarded screenshots, consultants parsing through modules named for stars, mistaking names for magic. The portal flickered. Payments misposted. The maintenance queue, stubborn as winter, refused to thaw. Then Adrian called, numbers showing up on my phone like deja vu. I let the first two ring out. On the third, I answered. His voice was thinned by long nights. We've lost 3 months of payment records, he said. Tenants are furious. The consulting firm says they need your input on the database schema. I told him I couldn't. I'm under contract now. He pressed. We'll double whatever they're paying. It's not about the money, I said. Silence. Then the pivot to threat. Non-compete. IP. The suggestion that I'd built complexity to keep myself indispensable. I felt my jaw go tight, then loosen. Every line of code belongs to Veltria, I said, steady. I've taken nothing but my experience. The system is as it was when I asked for documentation and training and was told to wait until next quarter. He exhaled a word I didn't catch. Have your lawyers call mine. I hung up and placed the phone face down like cooling metal. At Delvin, we wrote the bones out loud. Diagrams with verbs. ADRs that read like small essays. Why we chose this, what we rejected, how to unwind it later. We ran a game day, a planned failure, on a Friday afternoon. Things broke, then held. Afterward, we ate pizza in the war room and wrote down what we learned while the lessons were still warm. I drove home in the dark with the lake on my left, a black plate with a faint rim of light, and thought, this is how you build a thing that keeps its promises. Nate showed up with winter on his coat, and a look that said he'd slept in errors. Lunch? He asked, and I heard the undertow in the one syllable. We walked to the deli on the corner, the kind with steam on the windows and a chalkboard that never quite erases yesterday. Over sandwiches that fell apart politely, he told me the shape of the chaos. It's worse than the messages, he said, lowering his voice though the grill sizzled loud enough to hide small sins. Backups are dirty. Not lost, worse. Corrupted. He flipped his laptop around. On the screen, logs, then more logs. The kind of gray text that only looks like nonsense if you've never needed it to save you. They skipped the offsite hash verify, he said. Ran the weekly without the quarterly integrity pass. One step left out, then the next. It held until it didn't. Now the chain thinks the chain is whole. He blew on his coffee. You built it to fail closed. It did. I felt the old ache. the one that sits behind the sternum when systems behave exactly as they were told. It wasn't to be clever, I said. It was to protect tenant data. He nodded. I know. They don't. He slid to another folder. Archived emails, the kind you only find if you know where the attic door hides. Subject lines like weather fronts, legacy staff reduction plan, transition timeline, cost synergies. Adrian to the board, on a slow drumbeat, for months. My name appears like a variable in a function. First to be replaced, custom work described as unnecessarily complex. The architecture framed as a moat I dug for myself. The cynicism was efficient. Numbers added up neatly, margins thinned into a story investors could applaud. Private equity wants out, Nate said. They've been grooming the numbers, less craft, more cosmetics. He tilted the screen again. A slide with green arrows promised 6-month transition to off-the-shelf. I studied the arrows the way you study cracks in ice, admiring how straight they are before remembering what straight means in nature. Why tell me? I asked, not suspicious, just careful with gratitude. He wiped his hands with the kind of napkin that moves grease without absorbing it. Because I quit yesterday, he said, and let out a short laugh that made me sadder than silence. Half the team is gone or going. And Ridgefield Properties, he looked up at me to make sure the name landed, is interviewing new vendors. They're 30% of revenue. One wrong move, and the floor changes level. We paid at the counter in small bills. Outside, the sky was the color of decisions. Come to Delvin, I said as we stood under a thin snow. We build the way I promised myself I would. He watched the flakes assemble on the sidewalk like a schema filling in. You're hiring? We are, I said. Start with the database. Start with the map. Back at the office, I sent Lawrence a note with Nate's resume and a sentence I meant to sound like infrastructure. He knows where the edges are. Lawrence replied in 5 minutes. Bring him tomorrow. That evening, I sat with Clara by the window while the lake shrugged on another day. How was lunch? She asked. Honest, I said. She nodded, and we watched a freighter move north, a slow idea with its own weather, steady because it understands its weight. The call came to Lawrence first, then to me through his office doorway, his hand covering the receiver like a man keeping a bird calm. Ridgefield, he mouthed, and I felt the room tilt a degree toward weather. When he hung up, he motioned me in. They're leaving Veltria, he said. They want to know if we can hold them. 12 weeks. They're funding for infrastructure. Full transparency on the hiccups. He watched my face the way you watch a monitor for the first stable heartbeat. Can we? I didn't answer with a headline. I asked for a whiteboard, markers with ink that hadn't given up. I drew the skeleton I'd been carrying around in a notebook, a staged migration, region by region, smallest first, with clear rollback points. A translation layer to decouple their current schema, misspellings and all, from the new one we'd tested until it felt like a rhythm. Identity first, then payments, then maintenance and reporting. A long hallway with labeled doors. Documentation is braided through this, I said, underlining an arrow. 3 weeks of it. Not a separate phase, woven. Lawrence nodded. Non-negotiable, he said, like someone remembering the first time he burned his hand on a stove. We pulled in 3 senior engineers and 2 more mid-levels. One of them a familiar face from Veltria, eyes tired, hands steady. Nate began sketching a migration tool that could map beliefs to facts without losing anyone's rent. We set SLOs that could be measured and held blameless postmortems before anything broke, practicing how to talk when people get scared. I wrote a runbook in sentences a stranger could read under fluorescent lights at 2 a.m. In the second week, Lawrence asked me to step into his office. The air felt like something had been taken off a high shelf. He kept his voice dry. Whispered interest, he said. Veltria is being shopped at a discount. We're considering an offer. The words didn't feel like revenge. They felt like gravity checking its math. If the acquisition happens, he continued, Jeffrey Ridge wants you leading the technical integration. Salvage what's worth salvaging, move the rest. I thought about the server room that still hums behind my right shoulder in memory. About the way a name comes off a building with a little solvent and time. I'll do it, I said, and heard my own voice say what my hands had already agreed to. On one condition. Lawrence smiled like a man who knew the line. We do it right, I said. Full documentation. Training. No single points of failure. No shortcuts that feel smart at 3 p.m. and cruel at 3 a.m. He put out his hand. Agreed. We ran drills on a Friday afternoon. We watched parts of the system fall over in a controlled way, then stand again, a little smarter. On Monday, Ridgefield's smallest region, 2,000 units in western New York, would move first. I drove home under a sky the color of clean steel, the lake on my left holding its line. Clara had left the porch light on. Ready? She asked, and I realized readiness is sometimes just a list you can explain without raising your voice. I slept, not like a hero, but like a person who knows where the runbook is. 6 months later, I stood in a lobby that used to know my footsteps. The sign above reception no longer said Veltria Homes. The letters were peeled clean, the wall repainted, the new plaque simple as a promise. Delvin Integrated Property Management. The same light fell across the floor. Different air. Lawrence and I walked past faces that had once looked past me and faces that now looked relieved. Some couldn't hold my eye. Others gave small nods, the kind people use when a storm has finally announced it is moving on. We didn't tour like victors. We toured like plumbers, checking pressure, listening for hiss. The server room was still there behind glass, steady cables, and fans breathing. Want to go in? Lawrence asked. I shook my head. We'll migrate it all soon, I said. Let it rest. In the conference room, the remaining staff gathered in a loose circle. Lawrence introduced me as the Chief Integration Officer, the person who would shepherd both worlds into one that worked. I didn't say, I told you so. I said, here's the plan. Here's the calendar. Here's the help desk staffed by humans who won't time you. I said, no one is being cut to make a chart prettier. You could feel the shoulders drop a fraction. The migration took months and all of our patience. We documented while we built, trained while we tested, wrote runbooks until they read like recipes you could trust. At 2 a.m. Ridgefield moved its last region on a windy Thursday, the graphs held. Tenants paid rent without knowing they were walking a new bridge. Maintenance requests flowed with the fairness we promised. The dashboard lights looked like stars you could steer by. A year after the first cutover, we were the largest property management platform in the Northeast by units handled and the quietest by outages. No headlines, just the soft applause of uptime. On a morning that wore the edges of autumn, I sat across from Lawrence while he slid a single page across the table. Board approved, he said. The Technical Education Division, my proposal D42, would launch next quarter. A curriculum for systems engineers and architects with ink under their nails. Documentation as discipline, failure as teacher, ethics as part of design. I didn't want a shinier title. I wanted apprentices and a library. I moved my few things from the integration office into a smaller room with a chalkboard and a door that would stay open. On my last afternoon before the new role started, Jason Bain knocked and asked if I had a minute. We stepped into the courtyard. My father asked about you, he said, hands in pockets. He's in Florida, fishing badly, still opinionated. He said we made our biggest mistake when we let you go. The wind tugged at a leaf until it let go. Value, Jason said quietly, is loudest once it's gone. Driving home, the lake lifted its small waves and set them back down, patient as breath. I didn't think about revenge. I thought about craft and how work done with care eventually makes its own weather. I parked, walked inside, and found Clara at the table with a pot of tea. How was your day? She asked. Last of one thing, I said, first of another. She poured. Steam rose like a future you can finally name.